Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Space for Life. Over the years, I've had the privilege of recording some really difficult conversations for people who are in incredibly difficult places in their lives, people battling cancer, people who have overcome tremendous addictions. And in all that time, the episode that we're going to talk about today, the conversation that we're going to have, I think is one of the most difficult conversations that we've ever tackled on Space for Life. And as such, I think it has more possibility for good than almost any topic that I can consider. We're going to be delving into the very, very hard terrain of suicide today. And this is a topic that comes with a lot of fear in people's lives, a lot of shame, a lot of taboo around this subject. And so we're going to walk into this territory truly with fear and trembling. But I have with me two incredible guest friends to discuss this. And these are people that we're not going to just be talking in general about suicide, but people with, an incredible depth of experience in this world, as well as the three of us, through this three-way conversation. We all have experienced suicide in a very, very close place in our lives. So our special guest, Ray Paul, who is the board chair of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and whose son committed suicide years ago. And I'll let you tell us just a little bit about that, Ray, but thank you for coming and being a part of Space for Life. And David Dwight, who is the senior pastor at Hope Church. David's brother committed suicide many years ago. And David has, as pastor of Hope Church, has had numerous instances, which I'm sure we'll talk about, of trying to minister and care for families in this hardest of hard territories. I recently also lost my brother, my older brother, my hero, to suicide just this past March. And all of this has been why the three of us have connected in a sense in this way. David, you've been on Space for Life many times. And our heart to talk about and to share and perhaps to bring some grace and healing in this most difficult of areas. So we hope that this is going to be a conversation that you'll learn a lot from, but also that in the midst of the conversation that you will experience some grace and compassion and some understanding in this most difficult of areas. So Ray, David, welcome. Really appreciate your willingness. This is not an easy conversation for any of the three of us to enter into. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's dive into this, if we could, maybe on the front end from a personal level. It's one thing to know a lot about suicide. It's one thing to minister and offer pastoral care to people who have gone through this. It's a different thing to experience it directly. So if you wouldn't mind, would you share a little bit of your journey and what led you into this territory? Ray, maybe you could get us started with this.
Tommy, thanks, first of all, very much for having me and having me join you and David on this discussion on a very important topic that is very meaningful to three of us. For, as you just said, we've all lost someone in our life, and the ramifications of losing someone, a loved one or a friend to suicide is a grief like no other kind of grief.
Yeah, it is.
And to be with you all to discuss it today, and for your your audience is really very important to me personally. We lost our son, Buck, who was 25 years old, on May 20th, 2012. Sometimes it's hard for me to believe that it's been that long ago. His presence is still with us every day. And as the time goes by, it's the funny feeling, even though time does help heal wounds, we don't want that much time to have gone by in this world without him.
Yeah.
On the night of May 20th at 11:30 in the evening, we got the knock on the door that every parent dreads, but one that we certainly never saw coming. A detective from the city of Richmond knocking on our door, coming in and telling my wife and me that our son had just taken his own life. It was the last thing in the world that we had ever expected to hear. We never had any indication whatsoever that Buck had anything going on in his mind or in his world that would even so much as motivate him to hurt himself. So it was a state of shock and a state of wilderness, loss. Where are we? What do we do? Where do we turn? We just had no idea. And the discussion of suicide was nothing that was prevalent in our community or society. We felt very much alone in what to do, but we did have great leadership in our church and grief counselors, and were given some, very solid advice from the very beginning. I think more things that we can talk about as we move into this discussion. But we as a family with our daughter, my wife and I, decided right away that we would talk about how Buck died. And one of our motivating factors for determining that and discussing it right from the moment of his funeral service was that we realized that if we did not talk about the way that Buck died, we could really never talk about the way he lived. We wanted people to be able to engage and talk about Buck and not be timid or afraid to be around us and talk about Buck. And that has been our approach ever since then. And in our grief mission and journey, we discovered the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And we can talk more about this great organization as well. Mm-hmm. It has been our family for these many years, and they have helped us on our mission work to talk to people openly about suicide, suicide prevention, warning signs, risk factors, anything that we can do to educate friends and family and strangers about suicide and suicide prevention. We want to talk about it all the time. So thank you for having me today.
Was that a hard decision to decide to be as open as you have and decided, and to give so much of your life to this discussion? Was that hard for you and your family?
Surprisingly, it did not even enter our minds not to talk about it right away. I so clearly remember our minister talking to me as I was preparing my eulogy, which I gave at Buck's service. And he asked me, Ray, what do you want to do about the elephant in the room?
Yeah.
And I said, if by that question, are you talking about the way Buck died? He said, yes. Most people choose not to talk about that, and you do not have to talk about that. And I told him that in writing my eulogy, I'd already included the discussion on how Buck died. And I wanted very much to tell people how he died, but I also wanted to tell people that I don't believe for 1 minute that he wanted to die. And this was really long before I knew anything about suicide or the mental state of mind that can go with suicide. But I just knew that Buck would not want to leave his family and friends. And it still hurts me to this day that he didn't realize the love and support that he had by so many people that would have prevented him from taking his own life if we had only known he was struggling.
Yeah. I appreciate your sharing that. It's one of my hopes in this conversation is that it will enable healing conversations to happen. And those are often very brave conversations, and your choice to do that from the very beginning, at least I consider it to be a very, very brave decision for you and your family. So thank you for sharing that. And we're going to talk about this. As you said, it's a grief that's unlike every other grief. And I think it truly is a grief unlike every other grief. So we're going to talk a lot more about that. David, a little bit of your story?
Can I just share a bit of context for listeners and viewers? Ray and I had the privilege of meeting about a year ago, Ray. We had a mutual friend who introduced us. This friend lives up in the D.C. area. And my way of knowing the introduction, she called me and she said, David, do you know who Ray Paul is? He lives in Richmond. And she brokered an introduction.
Right.
And so we got together for a cup of coffee and met and appreciated that conversation very much. I think if you are in the fraternity that nobody wants to be in, which is a family survivor of suicide, you're deeply drawn to anybody's story who is part of that fraternity. Because you have your own experience with it, your own emotional depth with it. And you do know that everybody's story is unique, and yet there are some common elements of suicide that help you understand one another and know that you have been to some of the deep places of grief that tend to have commonalities with suicide.
Yeah.
So my experience, I have an older brother. It's funny, people say, is it hard to talk about? Once you've been in the dark pit of suicide and the topic has the lid blown off, the topic is not so hard to talk about because the lid has been blown off of it in your own life. But emotionally, it's painful to remember the emotions, the grief, the hardship, the sadness. That's hard. It's not like, we should avoid it. But if I get a little emotional, the memories in the hardest parts was emotionally very difficult. So I have an older brother, and he died in May of 2014. And he had experienced mental health difficulties most of his life, and try to keep the story in a containable time frame. I mean, I would say almost all his life. And by the time he was an adult, his difficulties were understandably the center of the emotional gravitational pull of our family. And we had all tried to help him in various ways. He was forthcoming about his difficulties. And as the years went by, he had years where things were pretty good, but it was sort of a, with ups and down seasons, the long-term trend was down. And so he lived 4 or 5 hours away from here. And again, long story short, we asked him if he would move to Richmond. We don't have other family in Richmond. My family are mostly in the Northeast. But we asked him if he would move to Richmond because it would be easier for us to provide care and support for him. So he lived with us. When he moved to Richmond, he agreed to that. And his mental health was degenerating. And so there's two sides to this. One was the journey into the deep places of mental health. pretty much every form of it, from counseling to psychiatry to medication to cognitive therapy and everything that comes with it. But his difficulties increased. And with that, and I also had conversations with his mental health caregivers, including his psychiatrist. He gives you permission for that. And so he and I would talk periodically about suicide. And this is another angle for some families. There are gradations of the degree to which a person is engaging suicide. Have you ever had a suicidal thought? That's kind of one thing. Have you ever envisioned your own suicide? That's a slightly different thing. Have you ever planned your suicide in detail? That's a different thing. So I'm trying to learn about all these things. Anyway, there are layers of conversations with psychiatrists, periods of time in mental health facilities for psychiatric help and care. And he had been in the hospital in psychiatric care for about a week. And I had to go be with him for his discharge interview. And you just got to remember, this is after 35, 40 years of deep layers with all of this. And he had struggled. Well, anyway, to be able to be discharged from a psychiatric hospital, there will always be a question, are you suicidal? And he said no. And I had a strong sense that he knew what to say to get the discharge from the hospital. And it was about 4 days later that he took his life. So there are details about the day and all of that, which I remember in great detail and living color. So we effectively in our family were kind of his caregivers. And so lots of layers of emotion that come with that. How do families at large process grieving a suicide? Different people have different emotional composition and thoughts about all of this. So that's a layer of grief that can be difficult. And then there's just specific details that come with this kind of a death that are hard.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that. It certainly, each one of our stories are very, very different. And mine, my brother, Mike, who was just a little bit over 6 years older than I, and I said earlier, and I truly mean it, he was my hero. He was the guy that I looked up to, the guy that I followed and emulated in every sense. Sports, faith, interest. We did everything together for as long as I can remember. And Mike was one of the strongest human beings that I've ever known. In his faith, in who he was a counselor. He counseled people who were struggling with suicide. He helped, I think, literally thousands of people in the area, in every area and aspect of their lives. He was the person, frankly, that probably nobody could have ever seen in terms of his life spiraling the way it did. And his was what felt like a long, slow spiral of about, 5 or 6 years at an intense level, perhaps some signs even before that. That was a combination of some depression and anxiety, perhaps some medications that went the wrong direction for him, but one in which it was incredibly painful to watch this person that you idolized in so many ways deteriorate right before your eyes. And I was very, very close to him throughout that entire journey. We talked incredibly frankly about what was happening to him, and it was just excruciating to watch. Couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine, as a person for whom faith is the most important thing in my life, I couldn't imagine his life ending the way that it did. It is still something I cannot understand. I understand and believe God's bigger than that, but it was a very hard part of his journey to watch him deteriorate the way that he did. He tried, I think, so hard to overcome the things going on. In the end, in the last years, it was daily pain for him of just a horrible nature to witness, that no matter what he tried, nothing could kind of slow down the trend. And in March of this last year, he took his life. Did we know it was coming? I don't know. I don't know how you answer something like that. We had gotten to the point we knew it was a possibility, and we knew it was something that no matter what we said, no matter what we tried, that we couldn't necessarily prevent. Hard place for all of us and our family. Still very, very, very fresh. Part of what created this conversation was, David, you officiated for the memorial service for Mike, and all of our family, Christy, his wife, his kids, myself, my brother, sister, we all wanted, as with you, Ray, we wanted to speak very clearly and frankly about what had happened with Mike. And David, you offered such incredible words of understanding and healing that day to a group of, I'm guessing, over 1,000 people that came to honor Mike. And I felt like, man, there's such a need for healing and understanding and compassion for those who are left behind, to understand this that can't be understood. And so David mentioned to me the connection with Ray, and I said, there's ever any good that we can do with this podcast, this is a conversation that needs to happen. So 3 very different experiences with this. And we're going to dive more into, I don't want to say the nuance, it's the complexity. It's the incredible complexity around this situation of someone choosing to take their own life, and how do we, who are left behind in a sense, come to grips with this. So we're going to talk a lot more about this, but
can I just add a thought?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Again, I don't know if it helps people who are listening. Your brother Mike was a very, very close friend of mine.
Yes.
So Mike and I had many conversations in depth as his difficulties increased, and there are elements to Mike's situation that are unique to him. You've been kind to say that what I said at his service seemed to find the right balance. I don't know that I could do that or could have done that if I hadn't had a suicide in my own family as closely as I have.
Yeah.
You all may know this or maybe suspect it. If you're a minister, there's a little bit of an age-old thing that is talked about in ministry, which is nothing will help your ministry like your own personal pain. And that's a little bit of a challenging axiom, but it's very true.
Yes.
In other words, if you're trying to help other people experience deep pain, nobody wants deep pain. But if you have experienced it yourself, it's hard to put your finger on how or why that enables you to enter space and help other people in really, really difficult places. It's a little bit like sort of the scenario. I don't know, I'll take an example in medical care that might make it a little different. Let's say you're a woman who is having a deep battle with breast cancer, and your oncologist is a woman who has had her own deep, difficult battle with breast cancer. She's survived it, but she's done all the things like mastectomies and all the things that come with it. Well, if you're the woman who knows who has that, and you know your doctor's been through it, there's some unnameable thing that happens between you where you appreciate the person, and they're able to speak to you in a way that somebody who hasn't had it, it's just going to be a little different.
And, if I just to that point, even though David and I just got together in the last year or so, as David said, we were connected when you lost your brother by many mutual friends who attend Hope Church. And when you delivered your sermon about the loss of your brother to your congregants at Hope Church, several friends sent me the link to your sermon and said, you have to hear this. And it was a message and sermon that resonated with us, that we connected to you back then, even though it took several years after that to meet each other. We were connected by your words that were so meaningful and helpful to us. Just, that short time, sounds like 2 years after we lost Buck, when you lost your brother.
Yeah. One of the things I do remember saying in that, and this is a personal thing, it still sticks for me. I just find the word suicide, the hard S's and the C, the word itself is just so hard. It has hard edges and hard corners, suicide. And on the one hand, does that mean anything? No, it doesn't mean anything. But there's something emotional about it. And I think I mentioned when I shared about my brother, any word that ends in CIDE is not a happy thing. You pick it, and if it ends in CIDE, it's not a happy thing.
And if I could just take that one step further, the word suicide, and Tommy, please don't, take this the wrong way when you talked at your opening remarks about committing suicide. At AFSP, we are trying to change the vernacular of saying commit suicide, feeling that just suicide is a strong word itself, but just the word commit indicates maybe judgment, indicates something not on the other end of commit as being good, like commit someone to arrest home, commit a crime. So
I feel that. I appreciate you saying that. I feel that. Yeah.
So just saying, take your life. They took his life. He even killed himself or herself. But just
it's really interesting. It's really interesting. It's almost like when you tell people what phrase do you use, I tend to say about my brother, he took his own life or he ended his own life.
That's what I say. Yeah, he took his own life. Me too. Yeah.
The word suicide, right, from Latin, it means self-death. And I appreciate your saying that.
Yeah, I do too. I think it highlights how hard this subject is, that we have to struggle that hard to figure out a phrase that we can live with in terms of how we describe it. But I appreciate totally what you're saying. I totally get it. And it's funny, as I was thinking about this episode today, I had the exact same thought that you expressed, David, about that word suicide and how it has a sharpness to it that I just don't like the word.
What is the thing about how a word sounds like what it is?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But I'm like, that matches.
It does.
The word itself is got such hard edges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. So, Ray, I really appreciate what you're saying even about that phrase. And it's one of the things that, I look forward to hearing more about, because there is such eggshell walking around this whole conversation. And I think that the depth that you and American Federation of Suicide Prevention brings to the conversation is helpful, because we don't know how to talk about it. We don't know how to say something without saying the wrong thing. And I know you weren't saying that but it just highlights how difficult all of this is.
It's one way, just a small way, but
small
a
way,
way
yeah.
to destigmatize it.
Yes. Yeah. It's great. So as we go forward, I want to give people that are listening a little bit of sense of where we're going to go with the conversation. And this will probably be a longer podcast than we normally do, and everybody can do with that what they want. But there's so much to talk about that I want to try to at least somewhat cover some of the bases. So Ray, we're going to, I think, give you a little bit of time to tell us a little bit about the broad landscape of what you've learned in your role about suicide, and not only what some of the statistics are, but what people maybe need to know as they may be navigating this territory with someone that they have a concern about. So going to take some time to talk about that. And then, David, I'd really love for you to share some of your thoughts from pastoral ministry about how we walk through this space as people of faith that perhaps are walking through the dysregulating place of having someone that we love that took their own life. So I'd like to talk about that. And then the final two places, which we'll all perhaps throw into, is what would we say, what are some of the things we would want to say to the families and the closest friends of those who are walking in the wake of someone that they love that is taking their own life? Finally, how can we help those? So we've got a lot of territory to talk about. Hopefully in this, we will have the opportunity to touch on the places that those who are listening are walking with, because I'm finding it's more and more rare. It feels like, maybe this is just because I'm close to it now, it's more and more rare to encounter someone who has not had someone close that has been in this place. So, Ray, maybe you can just share, take this wherever you want in terms of, what are the things, what's the landscape, what are the things people would need to know? Just dive in.
Well, Tommy, I'll dive in with something that you just said about the number of people who have been touched by suicide in their lives. And I'll start off by saying, everything I say, most things I say are, founded by research and actual data from American Foundation for Suicide
Prevention.
Prevention.
This is not your opinion.
It's not my opinion.
Right.
One thing that research does show that over half the people in the country will experience a loss by suicide to someone in their lives. So it's very broad reaching like that.
Right.
Demographically, the latest CDC numbers for the number of deaths by suicide, the most available numbers are the year 2023, and deaths by suicide were just over 49,000 people in the United States. And that has been pretty much a steady number right in that area for the past several years. Suicide rate dipped a little bit around 2018, 19. Pre-COVID, it had just dipped some, but started ticking back up during COVID, and is now around that level of 49,000 people or so. Demographically, suicide is the second leading cause of death for people ages. It's a wide age range, but from 10 to 34. It's the second leading cause of death. For a third of suicide deaths are by people who are 55 age or over. Men commit or take their own lives 4 times more so than women do. As a matter of record, 55% of deaths by suicide are done with firearms.
Okay.
Significantly, and I think really importantly, 90% of suicide deaths, the person has been diagnosed with a mental health issue at the time that they taken their own lives.
What's the 90%?
90%.
Wow. Huh.
So, bottom line is suicide is preventable. We have to recognize it as a health issue, recognize suicide as a health issue just as we look at diabetes or heart or high blood pressure. We very much want suicide to be seen as a health issue right alongside with physical health issues.
Right.
Since we lost Buck, have had so many family members, friends come to us and talk to us about their child or loved one, asking for advice. And Tyler, my wife, and I quickly figured out that we could not offer advice because people thought we would be experts just because we had experienced a loss. But we realized that we needed to be informed and educated and be able to give people good action plans of what to do if they were concerned about a child, a friend, or a loved one.
Right.
With my becoming a board member of AFSP, all of a sudden was just had access to a treasure trove of information, of everything that we do as an organization. I don't know if this is a good time or bad time, Tommy, to talk a little bit about AFSP, but
Sure, go ahead.
AFSP is headquartered in New York. It was founded in the 1970s primarily by a group of scientists who are committed to research and doing scientific studies on mental health and with the goal of preventing suicide. Since that time, our mission has evolved, and we have 3 very specific areas that we focus on. research and scientific research for suicide prevention is has been and will always be one of our main areas of focus. And advocacy is another key branch of what we do. We work hard in Washington and in states around the country. We have 70 chapters in all 50 states, Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. included. We have an army of advocates who either in Washington or state capitals advocate on behalf of mental health issues. One of our key wins over the past few years, and we were very a big driver in having Congress pass the National Suicide Crisis Hotline 988, which just came online 2 years ago. And 988 is a tremendous success. If people don't know about 988, we advise everyone to put it in your cell phone contacts for anyone who is in crisis, or if you're with someone in crisis, you can call 988. You'll get a trained counselor. I think there are 200 call centers without the country. It proven to be a well over 90% success rate. I think even 98%. If someone calls in crisis, the counselor can talk the person down out of crisis. And the third very important branch that we do, and we'll talk more about, is we have a very, very strong programs of healing programs for lost survivors, like the three of us. Yeah. They're events that we can attend. They're international programs where people go in to attend a program with people who are lost survivors. Right. So through all the AFSP work, I have learned very specifically of how to advise people what warning signs are.
Right.
If you're concerned about someone, what are the warning signs?
Can I step back for just a second? I really want you to talk about some of those warning signs, but I'd love to truly ask you about something that you said earlier that I don't know what to make of it. You said basically that you've come to the conclusion, or that evidence that suicide is preventable, and yet there's part of that hits me in a particular way, because the minute I hear it's preventable is also the minute I think, well, we could have prevented it. That's kind of what it sounds like. And I understand kind of on one level what you're saying, that so much of suicide is preventable, but there's also part of me that goes, yes, but there are situations where people have done everything in their human possibility, both individuals and those who care for these people, to try to prevent it, and yet it still happens. And so it's part of the difficulty, maybe to me, of this subject, that I don't disagree with you and I do disagree with you, and it feels like both are true in a sense.
You're so right. You're absolutely right. While suicide is preventable, not every suicide is preventable.
Yeah.
So you hit the nail on the head. It's a perfect and correct qualifier. And knowing the ways that you can prevent, but also that there's some, maybe like your brother, our son Buck, there was nothing that we saw that we could prevent.
Sure.
However, as we've learned warning signs, and some of the warning signs that are out there, a year after we lost our son, Buck, one of his very best buddies called us and said, Mr. and Miss Paul, can I get together with you all? Would love to see you. We said, of course, love to see you. You know, we love seeing Buck's friends. And he said, there's just something on my mind that I have to share with you all. He said, Buck was always the most outgoing guy and the first guy who wanted to go out whenever this friend came from out of town. He said, I would call Buck and say, get all the guys together, their old fraternity brothers, schoolmates, get all the guys together, Buck, let's go out. And Buck would always do it. He would get everybody together, rally the troops. And he said, the last couple times I came to town this year, I called Buck and say, Buck, come into town, let's get everybody together. And he'd say, no, Mark, I just don't think, I don't feel like I'm up to it. I don't think I'm going to be able to go. And he said, I just knew that wasn't Buck. I knew that wasn't Buck. And we had since then, learned warning signs.
Yeah.
But he had not been schooled on them. Nobody had, because nobody talked about warning signs. But one of the key warning signs are behavior changes. And nobody can see behavior changes better than a best buddy or a family member. And he saw those behavioral changes in Buck, but he didn't know that that was a warning sign. He knew it wasn't right, but he didn't know that it could be a warning sign that Buck was struggling.
Right.
And he was carrying that guilt that he had to get off of his chest, that he knew and didn't ask Buck about it. So,
yeah.
Preventable, we didn't see anything, but in retrospect, could have been prevented. And that was Mark's struggle. Could he have prevented Buck's death if he had known better, been educated better? And that's, again, such part of
and that's one of the things that's just so difficult about this territory is that we almost can't help but go to that looking in the rearview mirror, of looking in retrospect and wondering, was there something that I could have done? Was there something that I left undone? Was there something that I could have recognized? Other forms of death don't often have that complexity and that pain associated with it. And it is so important, I think, what you're talking about, to understand these warning signs. We really should all know them. So I want you to continue with that. And yet, at the same time, even that has the complexity of introducing, a guilt to those left behind of, was there something that I could have done that I didn't do? And that's not for all situations, but yeah, complexity. So say more on the warning signs.
Well, maybe the right sequence is looking at what some of the risk factors are.
Okay.
So you can, understand what can converge on people's lives to take them to the point of taking their own life. And certainly significant risk factors are health issues. Primarily, say, mental health is a primary risk factor, health factor.
Right.
There are environmental factors that can come into play. What's going on in somebody's life? Are they having financial hardships? Are they having a difficult time with marriage? Are they suffering from unemployment? Are they being bullied? Those are all a group of environmental factors.
Right.
And then there are also historical factors in someone's life. Is there a history of suicide in their family? Because that can be a determining historical factor. It can be an issue of,
Sure.
are there is there a history of someone attempting to take their life prior? Because would they do it again?
Right.
I talked maybe with those risk factors. If someone is contemplating taking their own life, there can be not just one single factor. If they have a mental health issue that can be compounded by some environmental issue, bullying. When I talk to school groups, Tommy, I really talk very firmly to students to be aware, that bullying is a very dangerous thing to do to your fellow classmates. And it's something to me people can control.
Yes.
I mean, some things can't be controlled, but how people behave toward their friends or schoolmates can be. So if someone is being bullied and they have a mental health issue or depression, those things can converge and make someone feel desperate, all alone, and can push them to the point of taking their own lives. So really realizing those risk factors are very important. And from those risk factors, then we would go into the warning signs. Warning signs can go from what a person talks, when they talk, what do they say? What are they saying? If someone says, I'm thinking about taking my own life, you might think they're just saying in jest. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But if they're saying things like that, I wonder what life would be without me, take those things seriously. Even though the way they're being said, take them seriously and listen to them. The talk, then their behavior. What is your friend, your family member, your schoolmate? Are they coming late or not coming to a sports practice? Are they sleeping late and coming late to school? Are their grades not what they used to be? Those kind of mood and behavior changes, if they have, darker periods than you're used to seeing them doing. If they, someone starts to drink more, maybe starts to do some drugs that they hadn't done before, any combination of talk, mood, behavior, put those together and consider them as warning signs. And then from there, take it to how do we talk to someone, and you can please tell me whenever you want to take a break or ask any questions about anything. While we have the risk factors, warning signs, another thing to look at is what we call protective factors that can help someone go through difficult times. Protective factors can be a strong group of family members and friends who the person is surrounded by. Protective factor can be a church community. Protective factor can be someone's critical thinking skills. If, as I tell students, that they have the ability to think their way through problems, and it doesn't necessarily apply to students, but I tell them that they're smart to be in school, and if they're feeling badly, I want them to know, I can think my way through this. There's an alternative to hurt myself. There are other ways that I can go about it. I can talk to somebody. I can do this. So critical thinking is an important protective factor.
Yeah. So the question, I know we have so much to talk about, but I feel like
my brain's exploding, just for the record.
Yeah, I know.
Too much.
I feel
no,
like
you've just said so many meaningful things that catch my attention.
Yeah. How, with these warning signs, I felt like in some senses you're just talking about, it feels like 95% of everybody's life. We go through hard times and hard seasons, and we disconnect for a period of time, or we're down for a period of time, or we show up late for school, or we're bullied, or these things. There are so many of them. How do we know where we're overreacting and when we might be underreacting? And as people living with other people going through hard times, how do we not operate in a constant environment of fear around these things that people are dealing with? Well, gosh, they're having a hard time. I'm afraid, that it's going this direction. It seems like there's got to be some kind of tension, balance point, discernment that that sees these things and knows where to go. So I don't even know exactly what the question is. Other than just kind of
one thought I had, and it made me think I'm going to go research this. Maybe you already know it, Ray. What is the per capita suicide rate in the U.S. compared to other countries? Are we high on that list, like near the top, or are there a lot of other countries that are ahead of us? This is my opinion. I feel like as cultures and societies go, I feel like we live in a culture where violence and death are put in front of us a lot.
Right.
Now, I can't necessarily say for a lot of other cultures. Now, maybe there are other cultures where death is more visible to people living their normal lives. In other words, when someone's dying, they're not sort of put away where nobody sees it. I think in general in our culture, when somebody's dying, we tend to try to have that person not be very visible. There was a day when your grandparent was living with you and they were dying and they were in the upstairs bedroom, and you were a 12-year-old and you had a grandparent who was dying. You might go visit with them and you saw and experienced their death. It's quite different than that now. So there's death like we see it more. But I think, my view, with movies, television, streaming, series, all kinds of stuff, the amount of death and violence that is fed to us in a way that upsets me normalizes death and violence. So if death and violence get normalized, it's likely to have a contributing factor to death getting more normalized. So we would like to not have people think about suicide when life gets really hard. We would like them to not think about that. We'd like them to think about a whole bunch of other ways to try to address what's happening when my life is really hard. But with the prevalence in the air around us of death and blood and violence, somewhere I think this connects. I think if we were to pull the whole lid off, I think there are three common, difficult categories in mind with this, and they vary. I think one is the guilt that survivors live with. And I think, Ray, in your situation where you all said you really didn't have indicators with Buck, in that case, the guilt tends to be, how did we not see it? And my brother and your brother, where we were aware of the emotional and mental health difficulties, there is this, how did we not stop it? Either way, there are many forms of death where guilt is part of the journey of grief for the survivors, but suicide tends to have this in a substantial way. I think there are three things that are in the air. One is, if we're thinking who's listening today, the people perhaps with the highest emotional engagement are those who have had a suicide with someone they love. What do I do with my emotions, my grief, and my guilt? I think another topic is people who may be hearing this conversation and they're afraid for someone in their life that they might take their life. When you've been to the bottom of the pit of suicide and you've experienced it, as much as you don't want to experience it, like we said earlier, the lid has been lifted off the topic. If you haven't experienced suicide, you haven't been to the bottom of that place of emotional pain. If you're a person who's afraid for someone in your life, that can be even harder because you want to wish it away. Like you don't want to talk about it because it's so fearful. You do want to prevent a suicide or do whatever you can, but the thought of it happening is so fearful that there's this double jeopardy, and we tend to avoid or want to at least emotionally avoid the topic. Like, I don't want to talk about it because it's so emotionally painful. But if the question was, but could talking about it possibly contribute to a suicide not happening, would you want to? Yes, but talking about it terrifies me, right? So again, we're just back to why this is such a complex, challenging topic, right? Another thing completely different, but I just almost think like, let's just name it all. What's the first thing that people think when they hear about a suicide? I'm probably overstating this. And your data would say, no, David, that's not the first thing. Let me restate it. Often, what is a first thought that people have when they hear about a suicide? How did they do it? Now, if you're a grown-up, you know enough to know, don't ask that question, but it is often the first thought that comes to mind. And I think that's its own topic. When you're a family who has experienced suicide, when my brother took his life, we had a few people that asked that. And we said, we, like any family who have experienced suicide, want to preserve every ounce of dignity that is preservable. And speaking of how they took their life doesn't have a positive or constructive capacity to giving dignity to the person, right? Because as soon as you talk how, you can't avoid mental pictures. You just can't. And we just felt we don't want people to have this kind of a mental picture of a person who was a fabulous person, who had many difficulties, but was a fabulous person. It's almost like the acuteness of that mental picture becomes so dominant because of the magnitude of the emotions that it can't not sort of dominate a person's mental association with the person who died. We chose not to tell people, not because we were trying to not talk about it, because we've talked very openly about suicide.
Sure.
But that's an issue that I think comes with this.
We do have a list of do's and don'ts in how to talk to survivors. And I think the number one don't is don't ask how it was done. Just what you said. Don't ask.
But it's like such the curiosity. It's like that question that comes up so quickly. Like if you're a little kid, you know how we love to talk about little kids because they say stuff unfiltered? A little kid might ask that unfiltered because it's a natural curiosity. They haven't learned the filtering yet that an adult has. That's another piece of the difficulty.
Well, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head that kind of getting into that last, the hows, the details, it tends to magnify, a person's memory in a way that is not representative of who that person is. And I think of Edward, did know Buck, my brother, and it go like, no, I want you to remember the 60 plus incredible years and the impact he had.
Yeah.
And yes, I acknowledge things ended this way, but Mike was such an extraordinary person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not because I don't want to talk about the other, but because this is what really matters, is what an incredible person he was, and the memories and the love that I had and he had. And that's what you want, you know. So
as we've been sharing a little bit, I don't know, I feel sort of compelled to say for people who are listening, we've all sort of tacitly spoken of, we're trying to speak to a very skinny balance point, which is the benefit of speaking about suicide without endorsing it, right? And that line and how you weave it is very tricky, because even if you were careful with your language, if something is even sort of normalized, there's a risk that normalization contributes to it.
Yeah.
And so we're back to this topic. It's so tricky. How do we speak to it without brushing the suicide word under the rug? And yet at the same time, do it in a way that has the sobriety to be compassionate, one, for a person who's taken their life, and certainly for their family members who are the survivors, but not somehow sort of endorse it. And I think, Ray, some of what you've said has done this very well. Like, you're leading people toward helpful preventative measures and all of that, right? So I think you've used the word repeatedly, prevention.
Yeah.
That word hits this balance point. What the goal is prevention.
Yep. And speaking of means, part of a risk factor can be when a death by suicide by someone is either described or sometimes even glorified by the media or how it's presented, particularly a high-profile death.
Right.
We as an organization strive to, for lack of a better word, censor or ensure a narrative is presented in describing someone who's died by suicide. We actually have some high-profile people who have come to us before and said that their newspaper wanted to graphically talk about how their family member died. And we helped that family craft a very thoughtful letter to the newspaper, big publication, saying, these are the risks that you make for other people, because contagion is an issue for suicide.
Well, it's the trite example, years ago in football, it went through a wave of people streaking, and publicized football games. And, the quickest way to eliminate that was the commitment on the network's part to say, we're not going to show it.
Sure.
We're not going to put the camera on it, because that's going to create this. I mean, it's a trite example, but it does kind of highlight this of, there is nothing in the slightest that we want to do to glorify, and the prevention talk is so critical that we want to do everything to prevent.
So if we could help prevent all suicides, that's where our heart is.
Yeah.
But as we're talking about this, for lack of a better word, and it's a really weird word, you triply want to prevent casual suicides, like impulsive, oh, well, it's not that big a deal. Like somehow your brother and my brother, well, let me say my brother. I mean, his mental battles and the darkness for decades, it was the only way he could possibly conceive of a conclusion to the pain.
Yeah.
This is very tender ground. Everybody's situation is unique. But what we would want to avoid and what we would we'd like to prevent all suicides. But in talking about suicide, in no way do we want to normalize it, to reduce the magnitude of it, to somehow have, I don't know a better word, it's a really difficult word, but casual suicides.
Well, and I think the other side of that I feel like is, yes, we want to do everything conceivably possible to prevent and to say there is no suicide that we want to see happen. And we want to do everything we can to prevent it. But then on the other side, I also want to do everything I can to minimize and to mitigate the pain and the guilt and the shame
Stigma.
that those have,
Yes.
that come behind it, that are, hearing these things. And so those things almost feel like they can't coexist, and this stuff can't coexist. We're trying to talk about a territory that is just wrong in every sense, both that it happens and that we suffer, and people we love live decades with, the pain of having lost someone in this way. And so somehow we're trying to get this both and everything we can say to prevent and to keep this, and particularly these, not avoidable, the preventable. We just want to prevent everything we can. And at the same time, we just want to offer just such grace and compassion to those who probably did everything they could possibly do to prevent. It's
and there, we all know this, right? There's some gray area in some suicides.
Yeah.
A gray area is like drug overdoses. Was that a terribly unfortunate drug overdose, or was that a suicide, or was it sort of a not mentally engaged, not in a healthy, balanced place, just do it, and death is the result? That terrain's its whole own difficulty.
Sure, and I think that just highlights again. We're using one word to describe 1,000 different, a million different life circumstances and situations that have all sorts of nuance to it. I want to come back. I think we will come back to a lot of kind of the things that we're talking about of how do we prevent and how do we protect that you're talking about that are so valuable. I think just in the interest of moving the conversation, I also want to move in the direction that was so helpful to our family. I think that you offered of some of the conversations and thoughts for those survivors, for those that have lost someone close, that I think you offered, both in terms of how do we walk in this territory, and also particularly, David, maybe from the faith perspective, how do we reconcile the loss that comes when someone takes their own life and the faith that is often present in that same person that came to that place. Let me just
lob that easy
just
one my way.
that easy one right your way. And
thank you. Ask David.
I'll just make sure I'm asking the questions. I'm trying to give any of these answers.
That's when I need to have like a Jesus answer to the question you asked me and say, well, how do you see it?
There was a time when I gave, tons of children's sermons because I was chaplain for lower middle school.
Yeah.
And the kids all learned that whenever you asked a question, you just gave the answer, Jesus.
Right.
So what's the answer? Jesus.
Right.
So if you give that answer, I'll know where it came from.
The standard church answer.
Yeah.
At one point, I think I'm just going to ask you, because you're speaking of things I said in Mike's service. In general, I remember what I said, but I'm wondering if there's one or two things that you're like, yeah, but you said this or you said that, because I'm sort of trying to fish for what resonated with you. So
Sure.
mention that. The question, I know a number of people who have a sincere Christian faith who ended their own lives. Some people have had the sense that, this is the, quote, unforgivable sin. At a certain level, I think I have to stay within my boundaries. I don't see anything in the Bible that suggests that.
Okay.
I've heard various teachings on it. I've heard some traditions of the church, kind of the capital C, big church, that might suggest that. My teaching, I'm always trying to say, do I see something that the scriptures teach and give us enough clarity to be able to have a reliable viewpoint on it? I don't see anything in the Bible that says suicide is the unforgivable sin.
Which, let me just take that a step further, because you're saying that kind of in the negative.
Mm-hmm.
Am I accurate in saying from the positive that you do not believe that that suicide is an unforgivable?
That'd be correct.
Okay.
And, we use the phrase, the unforgivable sin, as though there's one.
Right.
This all gets a little weird with religious lingo. That's correct. I do not believe that suicide is an unforgivable sin. I think the nature of God as we know him in Scripture, the depth of his compassion and his love, and the fact that there is nothing in the Bible that speaks to suicide being an unforgivable sin.
Yeah. Let me speak to something, in terms of what was meaningful to me, when you're hearing someone speak, you hear what you hear, not necessarily what they always say, but, one of the senses that was really meaningful to me as we began to process Mike's death with so many of the really meaningful things that you said, is that the way Mike died does not define his life. And that was so helpful. I had this vague thought in my mind that, if we walk faithfully with God, then our end should be always glorious and good.
Mm-hmm.
And this helped me realize that's not necessarily true.
Mm-hmm.
In that. And it helped me, it gave me permission, I guess, to see the glory of Mike's life, while at the same time recognizing I am so sorry and sad that his life ended that way.
Mm-hmm.
I wish so badly it hadn't, but it did.
Mm-hmm.
I have to acknowledge that, but it doesn't define who he is in my life and my memories for the rest of my life. And I guess in some senses, I needed that permission to not have the way he ended his life define the way he resided in my memory going forward. Is that...
Well, one thing I do remember saying, again, every situation is very unique. So a thought doesn't apply to all of them.
Right.
But in Mike's situation, I think some observers of suicide who maybe haven't been too close to it might say something like, well, do you know the pain your suicide will cause to other people? If you really loved these people, why would you do it? Wouldn't love keep you here and have you not do it?
Right.
As I said to you, I was a very close friend of Mike's. You and I had times with Mike together. I know you had many conversations with Mike that were between the two of you. I don't always know everything you talked about. I know that I had many conversations with Mike between the two of us. And what I know from my conversations with Mike is that, people might say, well, if he loved, why would he do it? Why would he, quote, cut his life short? What I know of Mike is it's because of his love that he held on so long.
Yes.
It is because of his thoughts about family and people he loved and the pain ending his own life could cause, the pain it would bring to them, that he endured so long. It's the magnitude of Mike's character, the magnitude of his love that kept him here longer. And I'm confident of that based on conversations I had with him.
Well, a lot of this, I think, highlights just the incredibly painful walk that those who are the survivors of a suicide have to walk in, all of the different nuances, all of the questions, the unanswered questions, perhaps in a way that's different from other ways that people die, the unanswered questions that exist, and that we need to walk in those unanswered questions, questions of faith, questions of guilt, questions of why, all of those things. And I think it calls for an extraordinary community of love to come along and just be with you in that. And that is so difficult. And it's one of the places that, I recognize that so many people don't know what to do when a friend has lost someone that they love. And it's so easy and tempting to just take the path of, therefore I won't do anything so I won't mess up.
Right.
And
it's understandable.
It's totally understandable.
Because of the fear of doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You know the old story. If somebody's experienced a death and you don't know what to say, the best thing to say is, I am so sorry for your loss. You don't need to have explanations. You don't need to say more than that. And there's really not much more to say in the big picture.
Yeah.
And, sometimes in religious environments, people are a little prone to kind of write a little bit of religious observation. I usually counsel people away from that.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong with saying, I am so sorry for your loss.
Yes.
And so if somebody's hearing it and, they have somebody they care about a lot and that person had a suicide death in their family, you won't go wrong saying, I'm so sorry for your loss.
And the one thing you don't say is, I know how you feel.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, what you said, David, is so, of course, spot on, but saying I know how you feel, particularly related to loss by suicide.
Yes.
I mean, we could say that to each other and get a pass.
Sure.
That is one of the unique things that happens if you're in a group like this where we've all had suicide. And I don't think we would say, I know how you feel. We might say, I've experienced suicide as well. I'm so sorry. Because I might have snippets of knowing what suicide feels like, but I don't know the nuances of all that you have walked through in it. One of the things that, to me, if I could just share a brief story, here's something, this will make me emotional. Here's something that I never, ever saw coming. When my brother died, the shock of losing him was so huge. For a number of days, I felt paralyzed. I just couldn't conceive myself doing anything. And what began to happen was after about 3 days, we had about 3 condolence cards show up in our mailbox. And went to the mail and opened these cards. And we just thought, oh, that's so nice. Well, the next day there were like 5 cards. The next day there was like 10 cards. Probably for 3 weeks, there were between 5 and 10 condolence cards in our mailbox every single day. What would that be? 10 times 20, 200 some cards? Something like that. It was probably more than that. In my memory, it was about 300 cards. And what began to happen, something we never, ever imagined. When you start a church like we started a church, you have a certain vision for how you're going to minister to the church. You never have a sense of how this church is going to help you through one of the deepest, darkest times of your own life. You would have never seen it coming. And so for a period of about 3 weeks, our mail used to come at about 4 p.m. And every evening, as a ritual to the closure of the day, Elizabeth and I would sit together and we would read these cards, and the kindness and the articulateness of what people would say. And after about 3 days, what we ended up doing, for some reason, I don't know why, we would each read them. We would read them twice. But like she would hear me read it, and then I'd hand her the cards, and then she would read them. And we would have things like, wait, read that sentence again. What was that word they used? Wait, who was that one from? It was one of the most extraordinarily helpful, therapeutic things I could ever imagine. And I just think part of it was just not anything we could have ever seen coming. And so, Ray, you talked about your church and the help that Randy and others gave you. Randy is the rector of Ray's church, who I know a little bit distantly, but who I appreciate very much. Man, if you have that kind of support, I remember reading a couple books about suicide after we experienced this. And a couple of them I didn't find very helpful. Some of them I found very helpful. But 1 or 2 of them, you read the book and you can just read the book and see that the person who wrote it didn't really have a network of supportive relationships. And by comparison, I would think trying to move through this grief with this community of love and support and faith encouragement versus not having anything like that is just huge.
Can't imagine where we would have been and where we still are with that community support. Mm-hmm. One thing that we've learned just from own personal experience from that first outpouring, communities move on, life moves on for everyone, and you kind of expect that. But we've learned that friends that maybe we hadn't seen for a long time were getting in touch with us 5, 6, even as recently as 3 months ago. Tyler, my wife, got a lengthy letter from a friend that she hadn't seen since just out of college days, who lives out of state. And
that
she
wasn't that long ago, Ray.
Yeah. But she wrote Tyler and said, I don't even know how to begin. I feel so guilty that I haven't written this. That I've had you all on my mind for all these years. And I'm finally writing. I've kept up with you. I've kept up with what Ray's doing in suicide prevention, what your family's doing. And that letter, even now, means so much.
Yeah.
So from this, we have learned that it's never too late. If we even get in the same situation where we haven't appropriately reached out to a friend or family who lost someone, we know that it really doesn't matter when you do it. Whenever we receive something still, it is just as meaningful as it was when we first lost Buck. Do you find that?
Oh, gosh. I just think that's so beautiful. And even your articulation of the words this person wrote to Tyler, I feel so guilty. It's been all these years. I mean, how dear and not easy for her. And you feel that. When you've been through suicide, you've been through the deepest emotional places you will probably ever go. And once you have had all of those crevices opened up and you're acquainted with this level of human emotional interaction, it all means so much more to you. And I definitely feel that. And this is not just limited to suicide, but so often I think maybe if somebody, let's just call suicide a tragic death, okay? We'll just very generalize it. So often if somebody has experienced a tragic death, right, you have, I'll call it 2 tragic deaths because you have a daughter who died of cancer. Sometimes I think people who have never experienced a tragic death, they're in this specter of unknowing, like, oh, I bet that's a topic I shouldn't raise with them. I bet that's so hard they don't want to talk about it. Pretty much everybody I know who's experienced a tragic death of someone they love dearly, I would love for you to remember them to me.
Yes.
I would love for you to say,
It's very true.
I remember Buck and his fabulous personality, right? And of course, you would love to hear that. But I think sometimes people are like, it's a tragic death, so I'm sure it's so hard that maybe we just shouldn't mention it. But, anybody who would say to you, you guys, I know it's a lot of years now since Perrin died, but I got to tell you, there's so much I remember about her that I love. You would say, tell me everything. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, and it highlights, and I will say, I mean, I hesitate to use the term of silver lining, but the truth of the matter with both Perrin and Mike is that those losses have caused us to feel a level and an intensity of love for us that I could not have fathomed, that I didn't know existed until we lost them. And that love was just a floodgate that opened to us. And that was something that I think, as you said, surprised, something that takes your breath away when you realize, on the other side, just how much the person that you lost was loved, but then how much you are loved, in that. And I will say, in one sense, if you put some like broad category, what do you do when a friend has lost? Just love them somehow, with a meal, with a card, I'm just so sorry, because that's what they need. They just need to be loved. And, how powerful, I think, what I'm hearing from all 3 of us, that perhaps why we're sitting here right now is because we've been so well loved in the hardest time of life. And we feel that way in a huge way. And I'm so grateful, and it makes me so desirous to share that same kind of love, when others have gone through that.
Yeah, I love what you said, David, about saying the name. That it's so important for us to hear, so we consequently know if someone's lost. Say the person's name.
Say the person's name.
You miss David. You miss Jane. Miss Buck. Yeah, tell us stories about Buck. I always say we love to talk about Buck. Don't be afraid to talk about Buck. You can tell when people are reticent or think they're going to upset us by bringing up Buck. But we automatically, tell us about Buck. Let's talk about it. We love to talk about Buck. It's so important to keep them alive that way.
Yeah. Well, we've touched on a lot of different things. I don't know if there is a parting thought that
I will add, just because I use the word prevention a lot, but just when we talk about prevention, and Tommy, you said, how do you look through the warning signs and what's maybe seems like normal behavior, the warning signs,
right?
But really looking for those warning signs that are just really obvious changes in character, personality traits, behavioral moods and patterns. But it's really important if you see those warning signs. We say one of our main educational tools is talk saves lives.
Oh, I love that.
And learning how to approach a family, friend, loved one, if you see the warning signs, if you're worried about them, that it is okay and almost imperative that you ask that person, are you okay?
Yes.
And open up the conversation. You don't have to do it in an accusatory way. You do it, just, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? Do you have something you want to talk about? And give the person the opportunity to open up and talk about it. Tell the person that you'll help them in any way that you can. Critically, if there really is a real concern, you encourage that person to seek and see a doctor.
Right.
First maybe family physician, then a counselor, whoever they can see.
Pastor.
But that's the most preventive course you can take is getting that person some medical help. And if you're with someone in crisis, know to stay with that person. Call 988. Very important to take away any lethal means that a person that you're worried about. If there are guns in the house, make sure they're secure. If there are medicines in the house, make sure they're put away. There are a number of lethal means you just need to be aware of and what's in the environment. So those kind of prevention, but really make sure the person gets help and that you're there to support them getting that help.
Yeah, and I'll gather some of the materials which you've shared with me that we can put in the show notes in case someone is, trying to jot these things down. But yes, thank you absolutely for
maybe
sharing
just
it.
briefly, Ray, what is the web address of the foundation?
Our web address is AFSP, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.org. And the website is an absolute treasure trove of information and helpful tools.
Really is great.
That can help you guide through different age groups of people who are suffering, the recapping these warning signs, risk factors, protective factors, vignettes of people talking about their own issues and how they got through them, survivor tools, how to support survivors of suicide loss. There really is so much information on our website. Thank you for asking.
I'm so grateful for your work there. I'm just grateful. That's the short answer. Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I just love, it's just really such a kind of a good, in a sense, a final word on so much of this conversation of talk saves lives, in so many different ways.
One more thing, and I'll stop. But when you ask someone if they are okay, that's one thing. But you can also research shows you can and should ask someone if they're considering hurting themselves or if they're considering taking their own lives. That used to be a taboo, that you would not ask that question. But research does show that when you ask that question, you are giving that person almost a huge relief, sometimes taking a big weight off their shoulders, that they can actually address the question and answer the question. And it's actually a very helpful question to ask.
That's great to
hear.
One
of the tricky things about that, I think, again, in the nuances of this, honestly, I think some people would be afraid to ask that question because they're afraid the person might say yes. And then they'll think, I have no idea what to do with the weight and the size of that. So again, I think I just would say, even the foundation's website can provide you some steps of information, right? Do you have someone you love who is considering suicide, right? It's a source of help for most every road in this topic.
It is very detailed, specific questions, line of approach that you can take with asking someone those questions. And our family, Tyler, daughter Margaret, and I, through the first years after losing Buck, when we all worried about each other, realizing, depression, we just have gathered through the years that he must have just been really severely depressed and just didn't talk about it, which is not uncommon for young guys, apparently, particularly just not to talk about themselves. But just for thinking about depression and each other, we learned with Margaret being out of town and worried about her, we would ask her the question, are you okay?
Right.
Are you thinking about hurting yourself? No, Mom, Dad, I can promise you I'm not. And she could ask us too. I mean, but it's a level of caring, concern question that you can ask.
Sure. That's very helpful. That's really very helpful. Well, I can't thank you guys enough for entering into a really difficult conversation. I know this is one that we've just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of, the different things that come, but I hope that, our talk, in some sense, will spur other talk that will bring life and help prevent things and offer grace and just be expressions of love to others. So certainly if there's any episode of Space for Life that I'd say please share with people, please share. It can be a simple act that could make a huge difference, in someone's life to simply share this episode and these conversations. So, Ray, thank you so much for taking this time, for everything that you are doing and the foundation is doing. It's just it's saving lives. I mean, what a phenomenal way to do such good out of such a hard experience in life. And David, for you too, it's you've been a huge part of our family's life and have been a source of healing in really hard times. So thank you so much in so many ways. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Tommy, thank you. David.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and God bless.
Thank you, Tommy.